Under the dry August sun, the sound of engines and laughter rolled out of the Iron Wolf's garage like a warm hum. The men were in their element, hands greasy, jokes loud, the kind of day that made them forget life's bruises. But peace has a way of shattering without warning. Jax, their president, leaned over the open heart of a Harley Sportster, wiping sweat from his brow. He was mid-sentence, something about spark plugs and lost causes, when the laughter behind him fell away. He didn't notice it at first, the way voices cut off, the sudden stillness. Then he felt it, the quiet, heavy, thick enough to make the hairs on his arms rise. He turned, rag still in hand, and saw her. A little girl stood framed in the doorway, sunlight burning a halo around her small, trembling body. Her Sunday dress, once pink, was torn and dirt-streaked, bare feet pressed against the oil-stained concrete. In her hand, a stuffed rabbit dangled by one ear, its fur matted and gray. Her chest rose and fell too fast, like someone who'd been running a long way just to get here. Jax froze. For a man who'd seen combat and chaos, this was something else, an unease that crawled deep, wordless and raw. The others noticed too. Spike set his beard down without a sound. Doc, who never stopped talking, stood still as a post. Shadow's phone slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the workbench. 12 men who'd built their lives around steel and noise were suddenly afraid to move. The little girl looked at them one by one, her eyes wide and wet. She was scanning faces, maybe searching for something: kindness, safety, courage, something she hadn't found anywhere else. Jax took a step forward, slow, careful, like approaching a wounded animal. He crouched to meet her eyes. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice rough from years of smoke and road dust. "You okay, little one?" She didn't answer at first. Her chin trembled. The rabbit slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. Then, in a voice so small it barely reached his ears, she said it. "I can't close my legs." The words hung there, impossible and real. Jax's mind fought to make sense of them, but his body already knew. He stayed crouched, breath caught in his chest. Around him, the air thickened with horror. Spike muttered a curse under his breath. Doc's hands balled into fists. Shadow stared at the floor like he could punch the world through it. No one spoke, not for a long moment. Even the fan in the corner seemed to stop turning. Jax finally swallowed the lump in his throat and asked, as gently as he could, "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Aisha," she whispered. "Aisha Johnson." He nodded, trying to steady his voice. "That's a pretty name, Aisha. Can you tell me what hurts?" She looked down at her bare feet, then up again. And in those eyes, dark and deep, full of something too old for her years, he saw it. The kind of fear that doesn't come from falling off a bike or getting lost. The kind that's carved into you by someone who's supposed to protect you. Behind Jax, the men exchanged glances, silent, furious, helpless for the moment. Because every one of them knew. Something had been done to this child. Something unforgivable. And though none of them realized it yet, that single moment, those 6 words would tear open the heart of Hallandville, Texas, and test the meaning of justice itself. Would you like me to continue with the next part of the story? What happens after the Iron Wolves realize who Aisha is and what she's running from? Jax didn't move for a long while after Aisha spoke. The weight of her words settled into the room like dust after an explosion, soft, quiet, but suffocating. Every man there could feel it, pressing down on their chests. He motioned gently toward Doc, the oldest of them, a man whose gray beard and steady hands made him seem like someone's grandfather rather than a biker. "Get her some water," Jax said, voice low but firm. Doc nodded once, disappeared, and returned with a bottle from the cooler. Aisha's small fingers trembled as she took it. The bottle was too big for her hands. She tried to twist the cap, but her grip slipped. Without a word, Jax reached over, opened it, and handed it back. She nodded her thanks, never quite meeting his eyes. "Where's your mama, sweetheart?" Jax asked softly. Aisha hesitated. She said I made things up." Her lips quivered. "She said I shouldn't lie about Daddy." The word hit Jax harder than he expected. "Daddy," he repeated carefully. She nodded. "My stepdaddy, Deputy Johnson." Behind Jax, Spike cursed under his breath, a sharp sound that cut through the silence. Doc's jaw clenched. The air in the garage changed from sorrow to something colder. Something dangerous. The town's deputy sheriff. Many people waved at parades. The same one who led the 4th of July safety speeches. A man who'd smiled at every church picnic. Jax felt his stomach twist. He'd seen the type before: clean uniforms, dirty souls. Men who wore power like armor and hid their sins behind it. He forced his voice steady. You came here on your own? Aisha nodded. Mama wouldn't listen. So I walked. How far? From the White House, by the water tower. Jax blinked. That was nearly 2 miles away. You walked barefoot? She nodded again. Spike stepped forward, shaking his head. Man, this is messed up. We gotta call someone. Who? Jax asked quietly. The room went still again. Everyone knew the answer. The law in Harlanville was the deputy and his friends. The sheriff's office was a brotherhood of silence. Shadow leaned against the wall, rubbing the back of his neck. If we call the cops, she's going right back to him. Doc set his jaw. Then we don't call the cops. Jax looked at each of these men who'd been called outlaws, drunks, failures. Men society had written off. Yet right now, they were the only ones standing between this little girl and hell. He crouched again so he was eye level with Aisha. You're safe here, he told her. Nobody's gonna hurt you. Not while we're around. She studied him for a long second, searching his face like she wanted to believe him but didn't know if she could. Then she nodded just once and leaned against his arm. It was such a small gesture, but it hit Jax like a sledgehammer. Trust. Fragile, undeserved, and absolute. That night, the Iron Wolves didn't ride. They sat around the clubhouse table. The same table where they'd planned poker runs and barbecues, now turned into a war council. Doc spoke first. We can't keep her here. Not for long. Someone's gonna notice. Shadow leaned forward. Then we hide her somewhere safe. Out of town maybe. She needs a doctor too. Spike shook his head. Man, the whole system's rigged. The deputy'll spin this however he wants. We're felons, he's the law. Who do you think they'll believe? Jax stayed silent, watching the condensation slide down his untouched beer bottle. Then he said, doesn't matter who they believe. What matters is that she's safe. Doc sighed. You're talking about going against the law. Jax met his eyes. I'm talking about doing what the law should have done. No one argued. As the hours stretched on, the hum of the night wrapped around them. Crickets outside. Aisha asleep on the couch, clutching that battered rabbit. The men took turns keeping watch. When the morning came, sunlight spilled through the open garage door. The smell of motor oil and coffee filled the air. And for the first time in years, the Iron Wolves had a purpose that wasn't fixing bikes or surviving the day. They were protectors now. Not by title, not by law, but by choice. And in a town where everyone knew everyone's business, it wouldn't take long before the wrong people started asking questions. By the time the sun rose over Harlanville the next morning, the Iron Wolves were already awake, their clubhouse heavy with silence and decision. The men didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Every one of them knew the stakes. A child was sleeping in the next room, clutching a stuffed rabbit, and outside those rust-stained metal walls waited a man with a badge who called himself her father. Jax poured black coffee into a chipped mug and stood by the window, staring out at the gravel road that led back toward town. The world looked the same as it always did, same dusty trucks, same church steeple, but everything had changed. Doc came up beside him. She's still asleep, he said quietly. Jax nodded. Good. She needs it. Spike kicked at the floor. We can't just sit here. That bastard's out there wearing a uniform like he's some damn hero. Shadow spoke from the corner, his voice low. People are already talking. Word's out that the Wolves took in some kid. They're saying you kidnapped her. Jax didn't flinch. Let him talk. But inside, he felt the unease tightening like a vice. In Harlanville, the reputation was gospel. And the deputy, with his perfect smile and clean boots, was the town's favorite preacher. By noon, a pickup truck rolled slowly past the clubhouse. Then another. Then a cruiser. They didn't stop. Just watched. Just made sure the Wolves saw the message. We're watching you too. That night, when the sound of tires crunching on gravel returned, the Wolves were ready. Headlights flooded the yard, bright and blinding. Aisha startled awake, clutching her rabbit. Jax stood, hand steady on the door handle. Behind him, Spike cracked his knuckles. Doc muttered a prayer. When the door opened, the deputy was standing there. Neatly pressed uniform. Clean-shaven. Smile sharp enough to cut. Well, he said, voice syrup sweet. Heard y'all had my little girl. Jax didn't answer. He just stood there, silent, the kind of silence that feels heavier than shouting. The deputy took a slow step forward. You don't want to make this worse than it already is, son. Just hand her over. Not your son, Jack said quietly. The deputy's eyes narrowed. You think a bunch of washed-up bikers get to play heroes now? He chuckled, low and cruel. You're criminals. The only reason people tolerate you is 'cause I let him. Behind Jax, Spike took a step closer. You let her walk 2 miles barefoot, he said, voice shaking with fury. The deputy's smile faltered. Careful, boy. Jax's jaw tightened. You don't get to call us boys. Not after what you did. Something in the deputy's eyes flickered guilt, or maybe just arrogance curdling into fear. You think anybody's gonna believe you over me? He sneered. I've worn this badge for 15 years. What V you got? A bunch of grease-stained has-beens. Jax took a step forward, close enough to smell the man's cologne, the cheap kind people buy to cover rot. I've got her truth, he said quietly. And I've got 12 men ready to make sure it's heard. The deputy's smirk cracked. He glanced past Jax at the figures behind him, Spike, Doc, Shadow, the others, each one standing silent, still as stone, eyes hard. For a moment, nobody moved. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound of engines. Loud, raw, unfiltered power. From down the road, a dozen more bikes appeared, friends of the wolves, riders from neighboring towns, men who'd heard whispers of what had happened and come without being asked. They surrounded the deputy's truck like a pack, closing ranks around its own. Chrome gleamed under the moonlight. Exhaust fumes curled in the air. The deputy's confidence broke. You're making a mistake, he barked. No, Jax said, voice steady. You did. And for the first time, the man with the badge didn't look like the law. He looked like he was a coward exposed. In the days that followed, the truth spread faster than gossip. Aisha's story made its way to people who mattered: the school nurse, the church women, even a local reporter who'd grown up here and still believed in decency. One by one, the town's silence cracked. The deputy was suspended, then arrested. The sheriff's office pretended to be shocked. The townsfolk whispered words like hero and monster in the same breath. But for the Iron Wolves, none of that mattered. They didn't want headlines. They wanted peace for the little girl who had trusted them when no one else would. A week later, on a cool Texas evening, Jax watched Aisha sitting on the porch, eating ice cream that melted too fast in the heat. Her laughter, small, shy, but real, filled the air. He turned to Spike. Never thought I'd see the day a bunch of outlaws got called angels. Spike grinned. Guess even wolves got hearts. Jax smiled just a little. Maybe. Or maybe we just got tired of pretending we didn't. As the sun dipped behind the fields, Jax started up his Harley. Aisha ran over, rabbit tucked under her arm. Can I ride? She asked, eyes bright. He nodded, lifting her gently onto the seat in front of him. The engine rumbled beneath them, a sound that once meant escape, but now felt like protection. And as they rolled down that gravel road, the town behind them faded into gold and dust. Some say justice failed that summer. Others say it was reborn in the unlikeliest of places, inside a rundown garage, carried on the backs of men the world had given up on. But Jax knew the truth. Sometimes the monsters wear uniforms, and sometimes the angels ride motorcycles. Weeks passed in Harlanville, but the echo of that summer afternoon refused to fade. The Iron Wolves had gone back to fixing bikes, back to their ordinary routines, but nothing was the same. The laughter that used to fill the garage had softened into quieter smiles, the kind that carried memory and meaning. Aisha stayed with a foster family nearby, a kind older couple from the church who had always looked at the wolves with suspicion. Now, they greeted the bikers with nods instead of avoidance. Every Sunday, Jax would ride by their house, slow enough that Aisha could wave from the porch, her rabbit still tucked under her arm. Sometimes she'd call out, "Hi, Uncle Jax." And he'd tip his head, hiding the emotion behind his sunglasses. The deputy's trial came and went. The whole town turned up to watch. Some came for gossip, others for guilt. When the verdict was read, and justice finally put a man behind bars who had hidden behind a badge, there were no cheers, just a heavy silence that felt like the town was finally exhaling after years of holding its breath. Reporters came after that. They wanted interviews, headlines, and human interest angles. Jax said no to all of it. He didn't want fame. He didn't want the club painted as heroes. He just wanted to keep their word to a little girl who had walked 2 miles barefoot to find safety in the place everyone told her to fear. But word still got out. A blogger wrote about them. A small paper in Austin ran the story. Then a journalist from Houston called it the miracle of Harlanville. For weeks, letters poured into the post office, some from bikers, some from mothers, a few from men who said the story gave them the courage to do the right thing in their own towns. One evening, Doc read one of those letters aloud around the garage table. It was from a woman in Montana. She wrote, "You made me believe good men still exist." Spike raised his beer and said, "Guess we proved the church ladies wrong, huh?" Laughter broke out, real laughter this time. The kind that came from knowing you'd done something right, even if it cost you. When night fell and the hum of crickets replaced the sound of engines, Jack stepped outside. He looked up at the same sky that hung over every ride, every mile of his life. But tonight, it looked a little brighter. He thought about Aisha safe, healing, and growing. About his brother's men who'd been written off but found redemption not in sermons or laws, but in the simple act of protecting someone who needed them. He thought about the town and how people still crossed the street to avoid them, but now, some smiled too. That was enough. And then he thought about that day, the doorway, the little girl, those 6 words that stopped the world. He still heard them sometimes, not as pain anymore, but as a reminder, a call. Because justice isn't always in a courtroom. Sometimes it's in a garage, in the hands of the broken who choose to heal someone else. Jax took a deep breath, kicked the stand off his bike, and the engine came alive, low and steady. The others followed suit, one by one. Engines roared under the moonlight, a symphony of defiance and peace. As they rode through Harlanville, people stepped out onto porches. Some waved, some didn't, but everyone watched. And somewhere in the distance, a little girl smiled in her sleep, safe because a group of men society called outlaws decided to act like angels. Narrator's voice steady, reflective, cut through the night in that imagined documentary tone. In a world where power is too often mistaken for goodness and silence for peace, 12 men in leather jackets reminded a town what protection really means. They weren't saints. They weren't soldiers of law. They were just men who refused to look away. And maybe that's what being human is really about. He paused, the sound of the engines fading into the wind. If you believe kindness is stronger than fear, if you still believe justice can live in ordinary hearts, don't just watch. Take a side. Hit subscribe, share this story, and let the world know real angels don't always wear wings. And with that, the Iron Wolves disappeared into the Texas night, engines echoing like thunder rolling away toward the horizon, proof that sometimes, even in the darkest corners, good men still ride. The night had long settled over Harlanville, but the town wasn't quite the same kind of quiet anymore. Peaceful silence had replaced the heavy hush that used to hide its secrets. For the first time in a long while, there was calm without denial. But for the Iron Wolves, calm never lasted. Weeks after the trial, life in the garage drifted back to something like normal. Oil stains, laughter, country rock on the radio. They still fixed bikes, still argued about engines and beer, but something deeper connected them now, a promise they hadn't put into words. It was late one Thursday when the next ripple came. Jack sat at his desk in the back office, sorting through a pile of unopened mail. Most of it was junk, flyers, invoices, the occasional letter from a biker brother in another state. But then, at the bottom of the stack, he saw it. A plain white envelope. No return address. Just their clubhouse name, written in small, careful handwriting. He frowned, turned it over, and slid a knife through the seal. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. The first thing he noticed were the smudges, fingerprints maybe, or tears. Then he read the first line. "Dear Iron Wolves, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Sarah. I used to work at the diner. I saw what you did for that little girl." He kept reading, his brow tightening with every word. There's another one. A boy this time. He's only 9. He tried to tell, but no one listened. Please, don't let them bury this too. Jack set the paper down slowly. For a moment, the only sound in the office was the tick of the old clock on the wall. Then he exhaled, long and low. Spike was the first to speak from the doorway. "What's that?" Jax looked up. His eyes were steady, but there was something behind them, something that had settled there since Aisha. "It's a cry for help," he said quietly. Doc leaned in, reading over his shoulder. Same town. He nodded. Same town. Different name. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They all felt at the gravity, the pull of duty they'd never asked for but couldn't ignore. Shadow broke the silence. We swore we wouldn't go looking for trouble. Spike smirked. Yeah, but trouble just keeps finding us. Jax folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. This ain't about trouble, he said. It's about making sure no one else has to walk 2 miles barefoot too.